Our second concept in the defensive section here is going to be to mobilize your hips and then rotate, don't roll. So when we find ourselves in certain leg entanglements, usually on the weak side, right? So we talked about the idea of Stefan has me on the strong side here, then I'm usually going to be stripping, coming over top, and then moving. Again, we're going to kind of go into the specifics of the position like this. But if we're on the other side here, again, I can do this before the submission starts to come into play, but if Stefan has a bite on my heel, if my hip can't move, then all the pressure that he's generating is going to go into my foot and then into my knee. But if I can start to mobilize my hip, even now, even though you've got a dig, go ahead and start to apply the pressure. You can see how, because my knee and my hip can travel, and my knee can't travel if my hip can't travel. So the reason we emphasize mobilizing the hip is I'm not trying to turn my knee in any funny position if my hip can't move. If my hip can't move, I'm going to run out of space very quickly with my knee. And this is why people get injured by heel hooks. You've got someone down here who's trying to roll, and their knee hits the ground, and then their knee explodes, and then nobody wants to train heel hooks. So let's make sure that we're mobilizing our hip, because now that I've mobilized my hip, if I go to extract my knee, I'm not going to roll and allow my knee to hit the ground. I'm going to rotate. I'm going to lift, and I'm going to rotate my leg. I'm going to dip my knee through the line and put myself into a safe position. So it's very important that we're not utilizing that kind of, if you've watched any Grappler's Quest videos from the 2000s, people rolling, running out of bounds. Again, this is where you're designing your defense around a rule set in a tournament. That's a horrible way to go about it. We don't want to rely on the rules to protect us. We want to create a physically sound movement where we're mobilizing our hips. And then when we start to mobilize our hips, recognize that I'm generating base here. If I were to just start rolling, I'm actually removing my effective contact with the ground. And again, I'm hoping that my opponent is not good enough, or that I'm sweaty enough, or we go out of bounds, whatever. But if I build my base, then I'm relying on my own alignment, and I'm relying on my ability now to generate force and break my opponent's alignment within the position. So when we say mobilize our hips, we're trying to create a shock absorber effect with two joints, my knee joint and my hip. And then as I start to lift my hip and rotate in place, I'm going to dip my knee through the line. This is going to be aided if we start to employ the concepts from the previous section, which is controlling the end of the lever. So for instance, if I were to find myself here and I manage to grab the bunion, start to build my base, elevate my hip, and remove this foot, now I'm separating the feet, I'm extracting my knee, I'm dipping through. You can build these, you can combine them together as is necessary, but the idea in this specific one is if my hips are mobile, if I can rotate in place to pull my knee through your thighs, that's going to be my best bet, especially when we're dealing with a locked-in heel hook. Even if it was something as severe as a reverse heel hook from the 411. So let's go this way. Yeah, exactly. So if I was able to mobilize my hips, and again, I'm not suggesting that you try this. If somebody's good, has got you, you should be tapping at this point. But the concept would be the same. Right now, Stefan has good pressure against my hip. If I'm able to mobilize my hips and step across with this leg so that I can pry this apart. Notice how Stefan wants to bridge in, but because he doesn't have contact with the ground, it's going to be more difficult for him to finish me. So I'm elevating my hips, I'm mobilizing them. I'm beginning to access a lever here, and as Stefan goes to bridge in, I'm able to rotate my knee through the line and finish. That would be a very, last-ditch application, but it's still a sound.
You're in the ADCC finals, and your family requires that prize money.
Exactly.
Medication for your daughter.
And not only that, frankly, as we get into hiding the heel and hand fighting and some of these other concepts that you're going to need at the last ditch, something that can be a cosmetically dangerous position might be technically unsound. Like the thing about this stuff, is you can probably see as we're going through it. Sometimes two positions can look the same, but the feel, based on where the proper pressure and weight distribution, the invisible jiu-jitsu is, they can be totally different. I know Rory occasionally, when we do seminars or workshops, With guys who have a pretty good amount of leg lock experience, like they know what these positions are, they know what they look like. We play a game, and we'll explain that in another volume. When we play a game called Leg Spaghetti, again, if you have some of our earlier volumes, we have these fuck your jiu-jitsu things that we do to develop skill in particular positions. And he'll just kind of sit there with his legs stuck out, with guys in the 411 trying to get a finish. And I mean, again, you never do that against a really, an expert, because they get you right away. But people who can perform the movements will put you in the heel hook, and you can sit there and kind of figure out where the limit is. And if you're good enough at doing that and creating small opportunities to undo that control of the hip, the control of the knee.
It gives you the time to.
It gives you the time to do so. The faster you are, the more confident you are, the more flexible your legs are, the more you can do this kind of stuff. Again, don't start with this. Don't be that guy who, I just want to learn how to defend leg locks. Let me get this volume. And then all of a sudden you're going to go out and get your leg broken. Because if you don't have the understanding of the offense, if your training partners aren't skilled at the offense, then you're going to feel it's called a false positive. You're getting a result based on something. Jiu-jitsu is rife with this. I think most people train in a way where they're learning how to do techniques that beat other white belts and blue belts and so on. It's frankly irrelevant. Doing leg lock escapes on somebody who isn't skilled is irrelevant. You need to make sure that you're actually building an entire game or practicing them against somebody who's actually good. So
just before
sorry for the tangent.
Just before we move on, Rob, when you say mobilize your hips,
yes.
Most of the time that seems to be getting your hips up off the ground, moving from sitting on your butt to being up in the air where you can move. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Again, we talked about the idea of the the alignment concept of base, posture, and structure. Right. So I want to utilize base here. If I'm mobile, let's say you put me in the 411 here. If I'm mobilizing my hips by, doing this kind of thing. Again, I'm not saying that it can't work. Certainly, depending on your level of control, it may. But if I'm not generating appropriate base, if I'm not getting up with my hip here, if I'm not stepping across, now I'm using you for base, right? So I'm using my hands for base on the ground. I'm using you for base with my left foot here stepping on your thigh, and I'm also compromising your structure, but also your base, your ability to generate force in the direction you need to. All right, so this would be a direction that I could go in, whereas if I was just, mobilizing my hips for the sake of mobilizing my hips, then I'm going to wreck my own knee much worse than I would have otherwise. So yeah, we say mobilize our hips. It has to be in a direction that I can control to mitigate the force you're generating, not in some random direction, like I said, rolling out of bounds and hoping that you can't finish me.